the Baen Free Radio Hour.
On the podcast, Mass Market's blast from an altered past and a war-torn future into your Christmas stocking and beyond the infinite. Plus, we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of Larry Correia's Son of the Black Sword, all right now. Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour podcast. It's an honor to have you along. I'm Baen Senior Editor Tony Daniel. We have a two-part roundtable discussion with Michael Z. Williamson and authors this time in a great new anthology called Freehold Resistance. This is a short story collection edited by Michael Z. Williamson, but it's also a complete novel or story cycle in that it tells the story of the resistance during the UN invasion of Freehold. That's recounted in Mike's groundbreaking novel, Freehold. These are the stories of the individual resistance fighters who come together in a libertarian manner in defense of the mostly libertarian planet Freehold after the fascistic UN decides they've had enough of these freedom-loving types and invades. We have Michael Z. Williamson, Jessica Schlenker, Mike and Jamie DiNote, and Jaimie Ibson in on the roundtable. And we continue with the audiobook serialization of Larry Correia's great high fantasy novel, Son of the Black Sword. Now here's the news. The Baen December mass markets are out, and ho 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 for your reading pleasure now at booksellers everywhere is Grantville Gazette 8, edited by Eric Flint and Walt Boyes. Hey, here's a generous helping of more stories of Grantville, the American town lost in time, that is, a West Virginia town thrown back into the middle of war-torn Europe in the 1600s, and its impact on the people and societies of that tumultuous age. Also out in mass market right now is A Pillar of Fire by Night by Tom Kratman. Correia, who is the series hero, has held off his enemies from the north, in the process dealing forces of the Zong Empire a stinging defeat. But now his adopted country of Balboa is under assault, and it's beginning to look like the game is up. But Correia's been planning this war for 15 years. He certainly hopes his enemies think that they're winning. A Pillar of Fire by Night by Tom Kratman and Grantville Gazette 8, edited by Eric Flint and Walt Boyes, are now available in mass market paperback editions and more at booksellers everywhere. Merry, happy, jolly, jolly. This is part one of a two-part roundtable discussion. Part two will be available next time on the podcast. I want to welcome Michael Z. Williamson, Jessica Schlenker, Chris DiNote, and Jamie DiNote, and Jaimie Ibson to the podcast. Hello, folks.
Hello. Hey, how are you?
Hey.
Hello.
Let me introduce our distinguished panel, who are going to be talking about, of course, Freehold Resistance, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Is a new book edited by Michael Z. Williamson, set in his Freehold universe. Michael Z. Williamson is variously an immigrant from the UK and Canada, a retired veteran of the U.S. Army and U.S. Air Force with service in the Middle East, a consultant on disaster preparedness and military matters to private clients, manufacturers, TV and movie productions, and occasional DoD elements. Bladesmith, award-winning and best-selling editor and author, and his hobby of collecting weapons has led him into an arms race in which he outguns Barbados and Iceland so far, and I can attest to that. Jessica Schlenker holds an MS in Information Security and Assurance, a bevy of industrial certifications, and a BS in Biology. There's a lot of letters after her name. She works as a professional nerd in the field of IT security. Sadly, she is too much of a white hat to actually combine these specialties into creating her own cyborg army, or so she says, but she's thought about it. Chris DiNote has served 20 years so far in the United States Air Force and Air National Guard, Pennsylvania and Ohio. He has deployed in Operations Enduring Freedom and Iraqi Freedom. Chris is a graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy and the USAF weapons school. He holds an MA in military history from Norwich University and a master's in strategic studies from the Air War College. A very amateur musician, Chris has also played saxophone and bass in several bands, just like he feels if he plays the saxophone like Deacon Blue. He was born in Pennsylvania and raised in South Jersey, and resides wherever the Air Force tells him to with his wife and co-author Jamie and their daughter Remy. And Jamie is also here. There's two Jamies. Jamie DiNote is a veteran of the Florida Army National Guard and U.S. Army Reserve. She mobilized for Operation Noble Eagle in Washington. Man, we have a distinguished panel here. Washington, D.C. Jamie is a graduate of Seattle University ROTC and holds a BA in criminal justice. Due to the demanding PCS schedule, she's a stay-at-home mom and a military spouse and is working on her first novel. And finally, we have Jaimie Ibson. And Jamie and Chris, you wanted to actually let me have you do your disclaimer after we get to Jamie. Jaimie Ibson was born in London, Ontario, Canada, and he's in Canada right now, and joined the CF Army Reserves as an infantryman while still in high school. A 6-month tour of Bosnia in 2001 impressed upon him just how awful things are in North America compared to awesome things are in North America compared to most of the rest of the world, which was an important lesson for a naive 20-year-old kid. In 2007, he joined Canadian law enforcement and has been posted to the left coast ever since. He is married to a very supportive wife and has 2 shockingly supportive cats. That is shocking. So, Chris DiNote, maybe throw out your disclaimer there so we know that it's you talking and not the United States government, thank God.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I just want to make clear, of course, that anything that you guys hear from me during this podcast represents my own personal opinions only and does not represent the official stance of the Department of Defense, the United States Air Force, or the National Guard Bureau. In other words, it's just me talking for me.
Excellent. So, what we want to talk about now is Freehold Resistance, edited by Michael Z. Williamson. Now, this is it's not exactly a story collection. It is a story collection, not exactly your run-of-the-mill story collection, and it is not exactly a sequel to Forged in Blood, which was out last year, but it is similar in some manner. Maybe you should explain this.
Thanks. There's there's an existing plot in the Freehold universe of the war, and there's an existing timeline. And what I wanted was different stories written from different points of view, but of a certain necessity, there's going to be a certain amount of crossover between events. So I we'll just put the whole thing together at once. So every story stands alone individually, and you can read them that way. But some of them are split across the timeline, and all the stories together concatenate into a whole that is basically a collective novel. So there's a finite beginning, a finite end, specific events and action throughout it. And, all the men and women merely players. But yeah, each character's got their own perspective on what happened. And, you only see your part of what's going on.
But it is it's a complete story then. You would call it a novel.
Well, it's both a novel and a anthology at the same time, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's a cool beast. It's out at booksellers everywhere right now. So who we have here are sort of the people that really put the integument into this, right? Is that correct, Mike?
To varying levels. So I'll let Jess cover her stuff here in a bit. She was her story expanded because we had a story we were expecting that never actually materialized, and then she had to fill in and cover for it. Jaimie Ibson could also have covered for it, but I already had 2 stories from him, except one of them got bumped due to space constraints, but that's going to be in the next anthology, which we're trying to finish up now. Shameless plug. And so he's going to ahead and written that, which is really good, but I wish we'd had it for this one. This is what happens sometimes. Things come up. circumstances change and you have to work around it. So yeah, Jess's starts at the beginning, ends at the end, intersperses some of the other stories. And then partway through putting this all together, I realized I needed an opposition perspective that was of a significant level. You know, the lower level troops see their own small piece of it, but they don't see the larger picture. So knowing Chris had some relevant experience in this, I asked him and Jaimie if they could cover the UN commander's point of view of what was going on. Jamie's story is split towards the end, but I also gave him the title of, Deputy Vice
Deputy Assistant Editor in charge of
continuity and stuff. Yes. He'd already put an entire timeline together for the Freehold universe. And much to my shock and thrill, there were surprisingly few continuity problems. There's a couple I'm going to have to retcon around on locations of things. But pretty much every event was consistent. So, you know, this became a juggle where I'm editing the anthology and then I'm running stuff to Jaimie to have him check against the timeline, because I did that for Angel Eyes, and God, that'll make your eyes bleed. It's okay, so, all right, now where was this? What time was it? What star system was it in?
A lot of this is taking place during Angel Eyes timeline, I would think, right? So maybe explain the setup, maybe before we talk more about the process, which is that the UN invades Graine.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe just start from the beginning a little bit and give a short précis of what the Freehold is and what the UN has become or already is.
Yeah. Well, in this future, and it could easily happen, the UN is very fascistic. You know, has tried to rope all the commercial and corporate power into political power, and it's mentioned in the background, but you know a lot of the large, in this case, multi-system corporations have their own political wings, and so there's a couple of independent systems that are mentioned in the universe, but they all have specific corporate backing. Whereas Freehold of Graine did, but was basically a colony world, and has no interest in joining this, the collective UN. You could actually draw parallels to Brexit, although there was no intention of doing that because this was started before that. And there's all kinds of distrust and unhappiness that, well, why won't you join us? It's like, because we don't see any reason to. And eventually the politicians come up with the brilliant idea that a war will fix it, as politicians tend to do. And then, being very largely Earth-based, they decide they should invade the planet, whereas most of the critical infrastructure is in space. I mean, if you cut off all the access to a system, you control the system. There's absolutely no reason to ever step foot on the ground. But they decide this is the way to, make their mark. And stepping foot into someone else's backyard generally doesn't turn out well for anyone.
Especially a planet like this, where people are used to going their own way.
Chris did brilliantly covering the perspective of an outsider who's going, holy crap, what did we get into here? And, he wasn't the character wasn't willingly brought into it. Chris should cover this.
Well, so maybe we start with, all right, so the UN invades and tries to basically just make everybody to win hearts and minds by telling everybody exactly what they have to do. Freehold government is not really a government. It's more of an agreement between the populace, and that's where the spiderweb sort of comes in with the idea that this sort of app is allowing people to act in a, what would you call it, crowdsourced resistance. Is that an accurate way of putting it?
So it's a communication, a mesh communication system, basically, that has been built from the ground up for encryption. Because well, how do you communicate privately at any point? That's what you're doing. And it was actually my main character's one of her many side projects as an IT nerd and hacker was this communication app that they were building because they found one that was buggy. Couldn't get it fixed, and they decided to build their own. And it kind of becomes the backbone of communications, trying to get information in and out in different groups. And how do you control security when there's no way to verify anyone? There's no way to check anything. So she just kind of takes what they got and starts using it, and it manages to work because that's what she had.
The issue on both sides is that there's no real way to keep secure your normal operations when everybody has a phone with a camera and there's a network, and you can't just shut the network off. That's like shutting off the phones or closing the roads. You destroy everything you're trying to accomplish. But the other side, you've got information overload. If there's 40,000 pictures, which ones are relevant? So you have to have both the processing power and the people to sort through this. So your intel war is a case of trying to overload the enemy while select what you need. Yeah. And I think Jess was comparing that to some of the stuff that was going on in Hong Kong. Yeah,
they actually are using mesh networks to try to get around some of the censorship going on, which I wrote that a year and a half before that became a thing there. But it's like that's what, in that situation, you end up going to, because if the central authority has control of the communication, they can cut it off, and they will. So you have to decentralize it to make anything work.
And historically, that was part of what brought the Soviet Union down, was they had to have what for the time were modern communications, but they could not control 100% what people were putting out over that modern communication. And people became aware that there was a very different world outside from what the propaganda was.
And this is one of the cool things about the whole Freehold universe, is that there's not really there's no Caesar that's in charge of this world, and there's Nauman, I guess, is the head of the special forces and such, but he's not really in charge of the people.
Oh, Nauman kind of reminds me, honestly, of Marshal Tito from Yugoslavia in a lot of ways. The more I've been sitting back and thinking about it.
Okay, that wasn't intentional, but I could see that.
No, yeah, and that's a little bit of what kind of came out of it too. There's definitely it could easily go into warlordism, if he was so inclined. So that's one of the things I liked about it, and kind of piggybacking off of what oh God, I just used a buzzword. Off of what Jessica said too is there's a little bit of what happened between Estonia and Russia a few years back going on as well, and I think that kind of puts a real bit of a contemporary, Hong Kong absolutely slams it home, so to speak, but that there's definitely some contemporary parallels and whatnot you can draw.
I mentioned in Force Majeure, which is a 20,000 word story I wrote for this, and there's some other stuff. So I do have significant content in it. There's Nauman's the ground commander, and because major communication is cut off, they're kind of limited. So they have a commander for ground operations, they have a commander for space operations. They think they may have a couple of other commanders elsewhere, but they don't have any way to communicate with them. So each element is having to work the best it can and use intel to determine what their own people are doing elsewhere to plan their operations. And then there's bunches of localized militia units which eventually become uniformed as time goes on. One of the things the remaining logistics sets up to do is to make sure they issue standardized weapons, a uniform shirt, and this makes them a officially uniformed what's the term? Lawful combatants.
Lawful combatants. Yeah.
Yep. And then body armor, 5 sizes of boots, and people just wear socks. But you want your troops to be as equipped as you can under the circumstances. The last one I noticed, it was when the Civil War in Liberia, and there was a photo, and it said this is the president's guard, and it's 12 guys piled onto a Toyota pickup truck. They've got a Russian 51 caliber machine gun mounted on the bar. Some have got AKs, some have got FALs, but they're all wearing brand new Doc Marten boots. All brand new pairs. It's like, well, if someone was thinking, because if you've got some spare money, there's plenty of guns over there. Good footwear makes a difference. When you've got to get up and close and engage, it could be a deciding factor. And if you can standardize your boots, your body armor, your uniforms, you're a long way to having a cohesive force.
No, I was going to say is that I'm glad you bring up the Liberia thing too, is because I'm glad that there's so many touchstones throughout the entire book that aren't GWAT. And that's actually had a lot to do with how Jamie and I ended up writing the UN perspective in General Huff on that, was that we didn't want people to fixate on, oh, this is an allegory for Iraq or Afghanistan or something like that. It's like, well, yeah, there's a little bit of that, but there's so many other things that you could put in, like Mike's mentioned already. People have been doing guerrilla warfare and transitioning from guerrilla and revolutionary warfare into conventional war for thousands upon thousands of years, and like the story says, it'll probably keep happening for a long time to come too. So that part's huge. I think that it's not just a fixated on current events, Iraq and Afghanistan thing.
I started writing Freehold in '97, and I finished the first draft in 2000. Before anything happened with the war on terror. And as soon as it came out, there were all kinds of people, oh, this is a parallel for Iraq. It's like, well, I guess it could be, but that wasn't happening when I wrote it. So there was no intention to do that because there couldn't be.
The theme is right there in the title. I mean, this is about the various characters in this, what becomes a war, coming up from guerrilla resistance into a revolution. It's about resistance. In general, it's an armed resistance in particular.
One of the things that really struck me as you read Freehold, in particular, is just how creative and devious, and how many different ideas come up when the point of view shifts away from Kendra, and they start talking about there's a street prostitute who ends up infecting a bunch of UN soldiers with a lethal VD. There's the biospores that are deployed against them. There's going after the logistics. There's the destruction of the jump point and the destruction of the skywheel. There's capturing and releasing General Huff. And this general realizing
releasing him stark naked.
Releasing him stark naked in the middle of the biggest park in town. And there's so much going on there that it's everybody's had like a visit from the good idea fairy, except this time they really were good ideas, and they're just pulling out all the stops and coming up with anything and everything they can think of that will demoralize or destroy the UN's efforts at occupation. And there's no way to predict it because it's utter chaos, because, it's thousands or millions of residents who are all going, hey, I got an idea, and somebody else going, awesome, let's do it.
And then there's, Soft Casualty is reprinted, and that one year, the first year's best military SF, and I was very pleased that, the story was received that well. But, it's basically a horror story rather than a military story.
That may be my favorite Michael Z. Williamson story of all time.
Oh my God!
That was a heck of a jump.
Yeah.
That was a heck of a jumping off point too. That kind of started this descent, this downward descent into like Heart of Darkness, of like horror, literally, that we decided to go with on it, just based on that, and then based on Casey's solo story too.
Yeah, I gave her I gave her the small bit of that because I'd referenced in Freehold. They just keep killing the new guy who gets into a particular slot. The guy just taken out of a slot, they put a new guy in. Somebody kills the new guy. They put another new guy in the slot. Somebody kills the new guy. Yeah. Nobody wants to be that
by
new
the
guy.
By the third new guy that's gone, it's obvious it's deliberate, which tells them so much. It's terrifying.
Yeah, and she took that and ran with it, and that story is like, wow, it's nightmarish. It's like, all right, who's the new guy? And everyone's sort of looking around, like, no, not me.
Well, you've got some very creative contributors here. You got a Larry Correia story, you got a Brad Torgerson story, Mike Massa, some great stuff in here.
Yeah.
That was about duelists, right?
Yes, the professional duelists. Well, he
Whose bright idea was it to invade Whose bright idea was it to invade a planet with an assassin's guild?
Yeah. So there's dueling in this universe, so that implies the presence of professional duelists. And I said, yeah, I've thought about that. I haven't covered it. But there wouldn't be many of them, because most people are not going to want to duel a professional. Most people really are going to settle things before it gets to dueling. It's just sort of your, last resort if you don't like the court's ruling. And he said, but that implies there's a small number of them. So, okay, so they're unemployed. What are unemployed duelists going to do? And obviously they're going to crowdsource hits.
I was able to use that as part of the information gathering network to help fund things and to help get information where it needed to go, which is where some of the starting process of weaving all the stories together, because that was a lot of work on Mike's part, on my part, on Chris's and Jamie's part. It was a lot of work to get those stories to actually weave together.
Yeah, I've got a story that interleaves, but it's out in space. Chris and Jamie and Jess's stories are on the ground among all the others, directly interacting, and heavy task. And of course, two of them were friends, and one of them was my wife, and I have to edit these stories. Okay, dear, so we have to cut the word count here. Now, please don't take... I was afraid to go to sleep some nights. No.
But I gotta tell you, man, it's tight. The end result is tight, though. I mean, it's amazing.
Everyone did very, very tight, fast-moving, heavy action stories.
Yeah. It all really fits together wonderfully. So tell us about force majeure for a second. All right, there's this starship that makes things, and this turns out to be a key.
Yeah. Well, it's the futuristic equivalent of a subtender. Your subfleet has to have a surface ship that can provide support, replace parts, etc. And when you're looking at 2 weeks travel time between star systems, if you're engaged in any kind of fighting, you can't be waiting 2 to 4 weeks for somebody to get you parts. You need the parts right now. You need the ammo right now. Hey, it turns out they've found a way to counteract that particular vehicle, so we're going to switch to this other type of tactic, but we need those vehicles. So the factory ship is basically a machine shop with every form of manufacturing possible. They can take raw materials, turn them into alloys, plastic, metal, whatever, ceramic, and then turn those into finished goods. And they've got blueprints with them for anything, or they've got engineers who can design blueprints for stuff that hasn't come up yet. So there's production on the ground as well, but as the war gets going, they're producing standardized rifles, standardized boots, standardized rocket launchers, standardized radios, and there's a couple of smuggling ships and a couple of stealth boats that are funneling these down to the surface into the habitats.
And what's cool is nobody knows where this thing is.
It's a foil to some of the difficulties that Huff encounters really early on. In Freehold, there's a scene where he's tearing his hair out because they keep losing these Guardians to these $100 rocket launchers that the Freeholders are putting together. And Chris and Jamie actually have an expanded section of their story that covers where Huff is just tearing his hair out because of the math involved in cannibalizing damaged Guardians to make ones that will still fly. Meanwhile,
we're all 25, so we have 17.
Yeah, and it's hold on, we're authorized this, but we've got.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So we're 17 to make 12, and 10 of them are functional.
Oh, and if you know,
and meanwhile, the freeholders have their factory ship, and the factory ship is cutting out all of the middleman stuff where they're waiting to send stuff from Earth. And instead, it's like, well, let's send them stuff that we know will be useful until we can actually, start getting, mission-specific requests in, and away it goes, and
the stealth boat shows up and
great concept.
The stealth boat shows up and says, okay, so we need 5,000 rifles, ammunition for them, and we need, body armor and radios, this many machine guns, and they just start cranking it out, running around the clock, nonstop. And I've got a friend who was on a sub. I asked him for some background on this, because these guys are in space, stuck inside this ship for like 3 years. There's no shore leave, there's no deck, there's no nothing. They're stuck inside a metal tube for 3 Earth years. That'll drive you nuts in very short order.
Yeah, Bubblehead's weird to begin with, but God bless them.
Yeah.
So, kind of like about the what you were saying there too, is that part of the frustration those guys see is, they're pulling their hair out, going over where is all this material coming from, because that's obviously a huge intel gap that they're trying to figure out, and at the same token, it's trying to convince the powers that be back home, higher up the food chain, that no, these guys are actually a lot better well-equipped than you gave them credit for. They're a lot more deadly and dangerous than you think, and that actually went into a requisition request from Huff for additional forces and capabilities. And I'm like, I've been kind of doing something like this kind of stuff for a while. I might as well just put a real one in there to just kind of show what it would look like. And then, back to the aviator map, a little quick blurb on that was one of the first things that I wrote just to try and get it started. And it's one of the few things that Jamie and I, didn't collaborate outright on along the way. It's one of the few. There's one or two of hers. There's just one or two of mine that are all me, and and not the both of us together. But that we were having a hard time getting started, so I sat down based on a real-world trip that I had taken. There's a little bit of real world that went into that, but I wanted to do something that had like a little taste of the movie version of MASH and a little taste of Apocalypse Now, a certain scene with Joker, whose side are you on, son? And it may or may not have involved yeah, that's Full Metal Jacket. I'm sorry. The Apocalypse Now stuff comes in after the whole, soft casualty thing. That's when it goes hardcore, the horror. But anyway, it really was, the idea was that helped kick this thing started. I'm just glad, the reaction when you posted that snippet of it was so huge. I kind of was just trying to get the process going. And, but there may be a little bit of a basis of a real-world visit to a real-world deployed aviation unit that may or may not have had something to do with the way that scene played out. There may be, some characters, nobody is based outright on a real person, I will say that. In anything we did, kind of going along with the disclaimer from earlier, but people are definitely composites of both real and fictional people.
They wanted to de-emphasize the military nature of the military mission. So our troops had rifles, machine guns, some Hummers, nothing heavier on the ground, but they had helicopters. There's no APCs, no tanks, no artillery, but we got helicopters. There's a huge gap in your combined arms here that makes most things kind of impossible because the politicians wanted to do it a certain way. It's referenced in Freehold, and it's referenced again in here that, there was this very bad assumption that, they allow people to have firearms, so, there's probably some hunters and some target shooters, and they're thinking, maybe 5% of the population, the people out in the boonies, without realizing this, modern day America, where everybody has got a battle rifle, or an assault rifle, or a carbine, or several handguns. The entire system is floating with weapons. So it starts off, everyone's got weapons. Well, you can't fight a war with just weapons. You have to have the logistics, the intel, the operational command, everything else. But when you start off with that, leapfrogging is a whole lot easier. And then besides force-producing stuff, there's factories on the ground producing stuff to the same blueprints. And you can't monitor every factory, every garage shop. I mean, it's no secret I've made rifles in my garage using hand tools. It's not we're talking, the actual technology is late 19th century for most of this. The technical innovations were later, but there's nothing more sophisticated about the machine tool involved. And there's simply no way that you can stop this from going on.
And by the way, too, that's a big reason why we kind of relied a lot on some reading that we've done about the Anglo-Irish War from 1960 to 1921, and we even mentioned Michael Collins in there, just because just from everything that was going on, a lot of what goes on in the background of the Freehold War, especially the counterinsurgency piece, it just made me think of Ireland. You know, both the early 20th century part, and then definitely about the Troubles, later on also.
You only need a few dozen people to keep an entire division tied down. As well, the Warsaw Ghetto demonstrated that. They held the entire division off for a month or more with a handful of small arms because nobody wants to be the first guy shot.
That's one thing we show in this group novel is the UN goes in with the highest end modern technology possible, forgetting that they're going against a technical world who then returns fire at technical levels and breaks theirs and brings them down to the lower end technology that they're not familiar with because, well, that's not civilized.
Yeah, they're very quickly dragged down to
their entire dynamic.
They're very quickly dragged down to 20th century technology. But we've got drones. We have hackers. We've got Intel satellites, and so do we.
You do?
Yeah, that was important too. Is that? Yeah, exactly. That was a big part of why we were kind of foot-stopped that it's not GWAT because the UN isn't going in blowing up Afghanistan. The UN is going in invading another fully civilized, fully functioning post-industrial space-age society here. It's not quite. The only reason you could say that it's not peer or near peer or even a peer conflict, using buzzwords again, is just simply because of size.
Right, size and economy.
Right, exactly. It's just that the Freehold, can bring to bear, just more stuff all the way around. If you could get it there, of course.
We've had several over the years. We've had several cases in the Balkans, in the Middle East, and I think in Afghanistan where we've lost equipment due to poor technical security. One of the, I think it was one of our drones, the command signal was encrypted, but the TV cameras were not. So the insurgents were just buying TVs from Best Buy. And, well, if you're picking up the signal from the broadcast, then you can make a general estimate as to where the drone is. And when you can see what the drone is looking at, you can then do a back azimuth on that. And you also know what the drone is trying to target or to observe. And, I'd mentioned this in the weapon. You can't assume that your enemy is stupid. That is the deadliest mistake you can make. And I observed the whole way through several of our current operations. If we were attacking Russia or China or somewhere in Europe, we'd be getting slaughtered. It's all well and good when you've got complete air supremacy, massive economy, and a technical advantage. But if you lose any of that, it becomes a much, much dirtier war.
This is, tell us a little bit more about, maybe Chris and Jaimie, about Huff as a character and how he comes to realize this sort of stuff. Because he's really kind of a winning, fun character for being, the main bad guy in a way. Because he's under all this duress from Earth as well, right?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And Jaimie, how about you lead this one off, too, about what we wanted to, what we kind of wanted to achieve with it?
We wanted to humanize the UN a little bit, and especially Huff, because he is a decent person. nothing in this universe is all black and white. So he's not a mustache twirling villain.
That was the big thing, and then it was just kind of keeps in line with the way Mike kind of presents him. Maybe it's a lot because of your background. He just did not strike us as American either, and we thought it was really important to kind of bring in, to also kind of hit at that deeper history stuff. That he ended up being South African in this case, and it just seemed to be somebody who would find himself in an insurgency, dirty war situation, and maybe have a little bit more deep inside about it. We thought that just might be one, it would be interesting, and two, it just seemed to fit. And the more we started digging into things like, the British South African police and Rhodesia, the conflict there and all that, we mentioned the Ireland thing too. It just worked, and I'm really happy to hear that people you think he's our take on him was awesome. I mean, Mike gave us a lot to work with. About 1,200 to a couple, maybe about 2,000 words that we started with. We started building out from there, but it was really important too that Huff act like a general. So again, I had some experience in my career that kind of really helped me sort of put some bones on that. And two, generals are never one person in real life, especially not at his level. At the 3- and 4-star level, they start becoming a gestalt in a lot of ways of their staffs, of the senior people around them, of their aides. That's one reason why we put an aide-de-camp character in there, of the senior enlisted that they interact with, of their senior staff heads, their vices, their deputies, all that sort of stuff. It all feeds in. If they've got personal staff, it could be the friggin' driver, or in our case, the personal security officer that he has, who ends up being a significant part of his retinue, if you will. So Huff is Huff the man, but he's also Huff the composite of all these people that are trying to help him command this operation, and we tried to blow it out even more. It's one thing if, like, you're managing the war in Iraq or Afghanistan by themselves, or even during World War II, like managing the entire Pacific Theater. Well, okay, let's blow this out even more. This dude's trying to manage the fight in the entire star system. So what does that look like? What sort of command and control, what sort of staff responsibilities, what sort of staff
it looks like ulcers and heavy drinking.
To pull that off?
It looks like ulcers and heavy drinking.
Yes. Well, he's an army. He's in the army, so there's drinking.
Yeah.
That was part 1 of a 2-part roundtable discussion. Part 2 will be available next time on the podcast. Now we continue with the complete audiobook serialization of Son of the Black Sword by Larry Correia, Book 1 in the Saga of the Forgotten Warrior. After the War of the Gods, the demons were cast out and fell to the world. Mankind was nearly eradicated by the seemingly unstoppable beasts, until the gods sent the great hero Ram Rowan to save them. He united the tribes, gave them magic, and drove the demons into the sea. But as centuries passed, the descendants of the great hero grew in number and power. They became tyrannical and cruel, and their religion nothing but an excuse for greed. The people rose up, and the surviving royalty and their priests were made casteless, condemned to live as untouchables. The age of law had begun. Ashok Vidal has been chosen by a powerful ancient weapon to be its bearer. He is a protector, a member of an ancient military order of roving law enforcers. No one is more merciless in rooting out those who secretly practice the old ways as Ashok. But Ashok isn't who he thinks he is. And when he finds himself on the wrong side of the law, the consequences lead to rebellion, war, and perhaps transformation. Now here is the latest entry in Larry Correia's Son of the Black Sword.
Chapter 47. Keita peeked around the corner of the storehouse. The only people he saw moving were worker caste, and they were concentrating on putting out fires, or caring for their wounded. There weren't any warriors in sight. Not that either group would murder them, if given the opportunity, just that one would be a lot better at it. Thera was at the other corner, trying to be discreet, but that was difficult when your stolen horse kept stomping and making noise. Maybe we can take the mountain path the Somsak came down. And go where? Deeper into the homeland of the house that's trying to murder us? Maybe there's another trail that branches off, so that'll take us back to the trade road. If you've got a better idea, I'd love to hear it. They couldn't swim an icy river. Waiting around until that was doable would get them killed for sure. From the smoke rising from the castless quarter, the only residents who might have been inclined to hide them were under attack. The workers would turn them over to appease the raiders. I've got nothing. Then let's go. From the sound of it, Ashok still has their attention. Even with everything he'd learned about protectors and bearers, it was a little astonishing that a lone man could fight a whole army for that much time, and for just a moment Keita felt a little flicker of hope that maybe this was all going to work out, after all. If the Forgotten truly wanted Ashok to be his general and lead his people to greatness, then the gods would surely provide a way. Except the voice had already spoken, and it seemed like the way provided ended in martyrdom and death. Maybe the Forgotten had only given Ashok the strength to last this long, so that Keita had a chance to overcome his fear and fulfill his destiny. As usual, the voice's prediction had been cryptic, and only available at the most damnably inconvenient of times. But for the things that had come to pass so far, it had never been wrong. But what if it wasn't perfect after all? He'd written down several pronouncements that hadn't happened yet, and he'd always just assumed those things would happen in the future. What if the voice was wrong? What if Thera was right, and the ones that had happened had been lucky guesses? If that was the case, then all of his work, and all of Ratul's work before him, meant nothing. He truly believed the Forgotten existed because he'd seen the miracles with his own eyes. But if the Forgotten was fallible, was he really a god at all? They put their hoods up and kept their faces down low as they moved past the distracted workers. Some of them were crying over dead loved ones, or wailing as their homes burned to the ground right in front of them. The raiders had truly made a mess of things, and it reminded Keita that his people weren't the only ones suffering injustice in this world. The whole men of Jarlang made their living from the dirt, and being unlucky enough to live in a place a fugitive had hidden was their only crime. Such destruction was uncivilized. The raiders were violating the law, and they'd surely be punished for it eventually. But no fines or executions or prison sentences administered afterwards would help Jarlang today. There was a crowd of villagers at the end of the road, but they were all looking the other way, watching as events unfolded in the square. Only an hour ago, many of them had been part of the angry mob that had formed on that very spot, but now they were only helpless observers. Well, not too helpless. Because if they realized Keita and Thera were traveling companions of the man who'd brought all of this misery to their sleepy village, they'd probably rip them limb from limb. As they got closer, Keita caught glimpses of what had the crowd's attention. There were bodies strewn all over the open area, and a huge group of Somsak warriors were converging on the bridge to the castless quarter. "There's Ashok," Thera said. "I can't believe he's still standing." Keita had to shield his eyes. The angle was such that the reflection on the ice from the climbing sun was blinding. The bridge seemed to glow like molten gold in the morning light. It couldn't be. He had to see. Heedless of danger, Keita began pushing his way through the workers. "Please, get out of my way!" He tried to force his way through, but everyone here was bigger and heavier than he was. The damnable bunch of pick-swingers didn't realize that they were preventing a keeper from seeing a prophecy fulfilled. Growing frustrated, Keita shoved someone. "Move!" The worker turned and shoved him back. Keita balled up a fist and punched him in the stomach. The man went down, groaning. "I must see this!" Keita got to the front of the crowd. Ashok held the bridge. In one hand was the furious Angruvidal, a swift black arc of destruction, and in his other hand was a Somsak shield, riddled with crossbow bolts. The bridge wasn't very wide, so soldiers could only come at him 2 or 3 at a time, and Ashok kept forcing them back over the side, sometimes in pieces. As Keita watched, the fallen protector beat soldier after soldier, while behind him scores of castless could be seen running through the smoke, all fleeing down a path to the north. The bridge seemed to glow with reflected light. Or, as the voice had described its vision, the Forgotten's chosen general stood on a bridge made of crystal, sacrificing himself to save the innocent. Keita's heart was suddenly so filled with hope that he thought it might burst. The workers around him were quivering with fear, knowing that when the Somsak finished their work, all they could do was beg for mercy for unknowingly harboring the infamous criminal. They didn't realize that something amazing was happening right before their very eyes. "It's true! Don't you see? It's all true!" Keita told the workers. Only there had been more to the prophecy. It had said that general would have to fight a demon in the body of a man, and as soon as Keita had that thought, he knew exactly which one it had to be. A lone Somsak was slowly lumbering toward the bridge, while the others hurried to get out of his way. His intricate armor was painted black, and there were antlers on his helmet. There was something alien about his manner, an eerie impression that caused Keita's skin to crawl. The keeper knew somehow that this man's very existence offended the gods. His sword was a long, fat chunk of steel, the sort of heavy, clumsy thing only used for executions, and from the way he was carrying himself toward the bridge, that's exactly what he expected this fight to be. As the Keeper of Names, Keita was compelled to testify to the world. He turned toward the crowd and shouted, "Behold! The Forgotten has called Ashok Vadal to be his general. He is the one who will free you from tyranny." They were all looking at him now. He'd never preached to a big group of whole men before, but when Ramroan had fallen from the sky, he'd protected all men from the demons. Thera was behind the workers, waving her arms to get his attention. She was mouthing the words, "Shut up," repeatedly. But she couldn't understand that Keita's faith had just been reaffirmed, and that a fervor had come upon him. It was his duty to spread the truth, no matter the costs. "Listen to me, people of Jarlang. If you help protect his general, the Forgotten will save you from these raiders. The gods are on our side. Heed my words. The law cannot protect you now. Only Ashok can." He turned back to see what would happen next. Sadly, before he could watch the duel between Ashok and the demon in the form of a man, someone whacked him in the head with a rock. Dazed, Keita landed on the hard ice and tried to roll over. Between kicks to the ribs and blows to the face, Keita realized that maybe this testifying thing wasn't all it was cracked up to be.
That was another entry in the complete audiobook serialization of Son of the Black Sword by Larry Correia. And that's it for the podcast. Thanks to Audible.com and to podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz, and a bucket full of ohms, voltages, and amps from which to create the ultimate resistance factor. Plus, thanks and plaudits to Michael Z. Williamson, Jessica Schlenker, Chris DiNote, Jamie DiNote, and Jaimie Ibson, editor and authors of Freehold Resistance. Please join us next time here at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.